I'll never forget that night. The road stretched endlessly before me, a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through miles of dense forest. The only sounds were the rhythmic hum of my car's engine and the occasional creak of branches swaying in the cold November wind. It was late, past 1 a.m., and I was alone, miles from the nearest town. My phone had no signal, and the radio was nothing but static. Just me, the road, and the unsettling darkness pressing in from all sides. I had been driving for hours, my eyes heavy and my mind clouded with fatigue. I was starting to consider pulling over when I saw her, a figure barely visible in the periphery of my headlights, standing by the side of the road. My heart skipped a beat as I slowed down. She was wearing a long white dress, soaked through and clinging to her frail frame as if she had just emerged from water. Her hair hung in dark, tangled clumps over her face, dripping wet. She stood utterly still, one hand clutching her opposite arm like she was bracing against an unseen chill. I don't know what made me stop. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe something deeper, a compulsion I couldn't explain. I rolled down the passenger side window, the icy night air flooding in. "Are you okay?" I called out. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then slowly, she raised her head. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, and her eyes, dark, hollow pits, seemed to bore into mine. My breath caught in my throat. "I need a ride," she whispered. Her voice was soft, barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. Something about her presence felt off. But I couldn't just leave her there in the middle of nowhere. Against every instinct screaming at me to drive away, I unlocked the door. "Get in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She slid into the seat silently. As soon as she closed the door, the temperature in the car plummeted. The warmth from the heater seemed to vanish, replaced by an unnatural, bone-deep cold. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap. Water dripped steadily from her dress, pooling on the seat beneath her. She didn't seem to notice or care. "Where are you heading?" I asked, trying to break the silence. "Just drive," she murmured. Her voice was distant, like it came from somewhere far away. I hesitated, but put the car in gear and continued down the dark highway. The forest around us seemed to close in tighter with each passing mile, the trees looming like shadowy sentinels. The air in the car grew colder and colder. My breath started fogging up the windshield, and I realized my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I stole another glance at her. She hadn't moved an inch, her gaze fixed straight ahead. The water dripping from her dress had stopped, but the seat beneath her was dry, completely dry. I clenched my jaw, trying to suppress the growing unease clawing at my chest. "Are you from around here?" I ventured. Her head turned slowly, almost mechanically, until she was facing me. Her expression was blank, her lips slightly parted. "I used to be," she said softly. That's when I noticed her reflection in the rearview mirror, or rather, the lack of it. The seat beside me was empty in the mirror, as if she wasn't there at all. My heart hammered in my chest. I gripped the wheel tighter, fighting the urge to slam on the brakes. "What do you mean used to be?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned closer, her cold breath brushing against my neck. "You shouldn't have stopped." The car lurched to the side as I swerved instinctively. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in the middle of the road. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely put the car in park. I turned to face her, but the passenger seat was empty. She was gone. I sat there, paralyzed, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The car was deathly silent, save for the faint ticking of the cooling engine. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, I heard it, a soft, mournful wail. It started low, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, closer. It sounded like someone crying. My hands fumbled for the gear shift as the wailing grew more insistent, more desperate. I didn't dare look into the trees. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching as I sped away. Even as the sound faded into the distance, the sense of dread lingered. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where I pulled into a gas station and parked under the bright, fluorescent lights. My hands were still trembling as I stepped out of the car. When I looked at the passenger seat, my stomach turned. It was dry, completely dry, but there, etched into the condensation on the window, was a single word. Why? To this day, I don't know who or what she was. But sometimes, late at night, I feel a cold chill in the car, and I can't help but glance at the passenger seat, fearing I'll see her sitting there once more. Road trips were supposed to be fun, a blend of freedom and the open road, filled with good music and the thrill of exploration. I thought I'd seen it all: dusty highways, quirky roadside diners, strange little towns. But what happened on one late autumn drive through the Midwest still haunts me to this day. My name's Jason, and it started with what should have been a simple journey. My best friend, Alex, and I were heading home after visiting family in Kansas. It was a 10-hour drive back to Chicago, and we were prepared for the monotony: podcasts, energy drinks, and a playlist we'd argue over as the miles slipped by. It was late afternoon when Alex pointed out the fuel gauge dipping close to empty. I hadn't noticed, lost in a blur of conversation and the hypnotic stretch of road. The GPS showed a gas station a few miles off the main highway, so we decided to take a detour. As we turned onto a narrower, tree-lined road, I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The golden light of sunset filtered through the bare branches, but there were no signs of houses, cars, or even power lines. Just trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. Feels like a horror movie setup, Alex joked, his tone light but his grip tightening on the wheel. I laughed it off, though I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept over me. Finally, after what felt longer than it should have, we saw it, a solitary gas station nestled at the edge of the woods. The place looked old. Not quaint or charming, but truly old, like it had been sitting there untouched for decades. The sign above the station read "Evergreen Gas" in peeling white letters. A small diner was attached to the side, its neon open sign flickering weakly. Weird vibe, huh? Alex muttered as we pulled in. I nodded. The silence was deafening. There were no cars at the pumps, no movement inside the diner, and no sound from the forest behind the station. Even the air felt unnaturally still. Alex got out to fuel up while I decided to check out the diner. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, breaking the eerie quiet. The interior was spotless but completely empty. Vinyl booths lined the walls, and a jukebox sat in the corner, though it was silent. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and a red apron. She smiled politely, but didn't say a word until I approached. "Coffee or pie?" she asked, her voice cheerful but oddly flat. "Just coffee, thanks," I said, glancing around. The place had an uncanny quality to it. Everything looked normal, but it felt staged, like a movie set that no one had touched in years. The woman placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. "Passing through?" "Yeah," I replied. "Just on our way back to Chicago." Her smile faltered, and for a moment, she looked almost concerned. "Be careful on the road ahead," she said softly. "It's easy to get turned around out here." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine, but before I could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. Alex stormed in, his face pale. "We need to leave. Now," he said, his voice tight. "What's going on?" I asked, but he didn't answer. I threw a few bills on the counter and followed him out. As soon as we stepped outside, something felt off. The air was colder, heavier, and the station looked different. The pump Alex had been using was gone, replaced by a patch of dirt. The surrounding trees seemed closer, their shadows stretching unnaturally long in the fading light. What the hell happened? I asked. Alex shook his head. The pump wasn't working, so I went to look for someone. But there's no one here. I swear I saw something watching me from the woods. Something? He hesitated, then muttered, eyes. Just staring. But when I looked again, they were gone. We climbed into the car, and Alex hit the gas. I glanced back at the station as we sped away. For a brief moment, I thought I saw movement in the diner's window, something shifting in the shadows. We drove in silence, the road winding endlessly through the dense forest. The GPS, which had worked fine earlier, now displayed nothing but a spinning wheel. The radio was static. Then, we saw the station again. Alex slammed on the brakes, his hands trembling on the wheel. No way. It was impossible. We hadn't turned around, yet there it was. Evergreen gas, exactly as we'd left it. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow on the empty lot. I'm not stopping, Alex said through gritted teeth. He hit the gas, and we sped past the station. But a few minutes later, it appeared again. Jason, Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. What's happening? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we had to get out. As we drove, strange things began to happen. The trees seemed to shift and move, their branches twisting unnaturally. The temperature inside the car dropped sharply, and the air outside turned to a thick, suffocating fog. Then, the headlights illuminated something in the middle of the road. It was a figure. A man, standing perfectly still, dressed in what looked like an old mechanic's uniform. His face was obscured by shadows, but as we slowed, he turned his head toward us, revealing eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Go, I whispered. Alex didn't need convincing. He swerved around the figure and sped off, the tires screeching on the asphalt. Finally, after what felt like hours, the forest ended abruptly. The fog lifted, and the highway reappeared before us, straight and familiar. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the drive. When I got home, I tried searching for evergreen gas, but there was nothing. No records, no photos, not even a mention. Sometimes I wonder if we stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see. A place outside of time, or maybe reality itself. And every so often, when I'm driving at night, I catch myself glancing at the trees. It was a Tuesday night in March, the kind of night that sits heavy in your memory for reasons you don't understand until much later. I was driving back from a friend's house in the city, a trip that should have taken about an hour under normal conditions. But that night wasn't normal. A deep fog had rolled in, thick as smoke, swallowing the highway in a shroud of grey. My headlights barely pierced the gloom, and every mile felt like 3. The clock on my dash read 1:03 a.m. I'd spent the day wandering the city with friends, shopping, sampling food at tiny cafes, and laughing until my cheeks ached. It had been a good day, but now exhaustion weighed on me. My eyelids felt heavy, and the quiet hum of my car was almost hypnotic. Highway 9 stretched ahead of me, empty and lifeless. This stretch of road was rarely busy at the best of times, and now, under the suffocating blanket of fog, it felt utterly abandoned. The occasional semi-truck rumbled past, their trailers rattling, the drivers' faces obscured in the dim glow of their cabins. Their license plates were strange, markings and colors I didn't recognize, like they came from places I'd never even heard of. I gripped the wheel tighter, focusing on the white line that flickered in and out of sight along the shoulder. The fog turned every curve into a mystery, every dip into an abyss. To keep myself alert, I started counting the reflectors lining the side of the road. 22, 23. That's when I saw it. A car was parked half on the highway, its rear wheels jutting dangerously into my lane. My heart leapt into my throat. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching as I veered to the side. The fog made it impossible to judge the distance, and for a horrifying second, I thought I'd hit the car. But I hadn't. My own car came to a shaky stop a few feet away. I sat there for a moment, hands trembling on the wheel, trying to steady my breath. Through the fog, I could make out the car ahead, a black sedan, its taillights glowing faintly like red eyes. It sat still for a moment, then slowly rolled forward, pulling fully onto the shoulder. Reluctantly, I followed, creeping along until I was safely behind it. The car didn't move again, but the driver's side window rolled down. An arm emerged, waving for me to pull over further. A voice in my head screamed, "Don't," but another part of me, the part raised to believe in the kindness of strangers, whispered that maybe they needed help. I hesitated, then shifted into drive and pulled off the road completely, parking a safe distance behind the sedan. The car inched forward again, turning onto a narrow side road that branched off the highway. The move struck me as odd, but I followed anyway, curiosity overriding my better judgment. The sedan came to a stop about 50 feet down the side road. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He was lean, dressed in a black winter jacket and jeans, and his movements were slow, deliberate. My headlights caught his face as he approached. A young man, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I rolled my window down just a crack, enough to hear him, but not enough to let him reach inside. My fingers hovered over the window controls, ready to roll it back up at the first sign of trouble. "Hey," he said, his voice smooth and casual. "You okay?" "Yeah," I replied curtly. "What's going on?" He leaned closer, peering into my car. "Fog's bad tonight. Thought maybe you needed some help. Not safe driving in this stuff, you know." I shook my head, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm fine, thanks." He smiled again, wider this time, but it felt wrong, forced, like he was trying too hard to put me at ease. "If you're fine, why'd you stop back there?" I hesitated. Saying I stopped because of him felt like admitting I was scared. "I had to take a call," I lied. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if he could see straight through me. "You sure? It's a bad place to pull over. Lot of accidents happen out here. You look tired." "I'm fine," I repeated, more firmly this time. He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Listen," he said, his tone softening. "My place is just down the road. 5 minutes, tops. My wife and son are there. Why don't you come wait out the fog? We've got coffee." Every instinct I had screamed no. I shook my head. "I appreciate it, but I need to get home." His expression darkened. "You really should think about it. Driving in fog like this, you're putting your life at risk. Think about your family." The words sent a chill down my spine. His tone wasn't concerned, it was threatening. I glanced past him, toward the sedan. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving in the passenger seat. My stomach twisted. I hadn't noticed anyone else in the car before. The man followed my gaze, then turned back to me, his smile returning. But this time, it wasn't friendly. It was predatory. Before I could react, he grabbed my door handle and yanked. The lock held, but the force made my heart lurch. "Hey!" he shouted over his shoulder. The passenger door of the sedan flew open, and another man stepped out, this one holding a baseball bat. He was larger, bulkier, and he didn't hesitate. He started running toward my car. Panic surged through me. I threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning on the gravel as I backed away. The man with the bat swung wildly, the weapon glancing off my side mirror with a metallic clang. I didn't stop to think. I turned the wheel sharply, my car lurching as I reversed back onto the highway. The fog was so thick I couldn't see if there was oncoming traffic, but I didn't care. I floored it, the engine roaring as I sped away. My heart pounded, so hard it felt like it might burst. I didn't look back. Even now, months later, I avoid that stretch of Highway 9 at night. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I'd rolled my window down further, or if someone else wasn't as lucky as I was.